He was the face you could not forget, a smile that could be tender or dangerous, a gaze that seemed to study the room and rewrite it in real time. Heath Ledger arrived in American cinemas like a gust of fresh air, the rare young actor who made Stardom feel both inevitable and somehow beside the point. People called him a prodigy after Brokeback Mountain. They called him a phenomenon after The Dark Knight. They called him a legend after the 22nd of January, 2008. But legends are often assembled from fragments. A red carpet photo here, a lady night interview there, a performance that lingers long after the credits. What we rarely see is the silent distance between those fragments, the hotel rooms at 3 a.m., the restless mind that cannot switch off, the private discipline of someone who treats each role like a mountain that must be climbed alone. Heath was never only a matinee idol or only a serious actor. He was both, and he kept trying to reconcile the two until time ran out. The story you think you know is simple. A boy from Perth, a meteoric rise, a tragic fall, an Oscar awarded after he was gone. The story that matters is more complicated. It is about curiosity that bordered on obsession. It is about a hunger to make new things, films, music videos, a Brooklyn cafe with friends, because standing still felt like a slow death. It is about the cost of intensity in an industry that rewards it on-screen and misunderstands it off-screen. This is not a eulogy. It is a map. We begin where all great maps begin, at the first spark, before anyone else sees the fire. Heath Andrew Ledger was born on the 4th of April, 1979 in Perth, Western Australia. The wide skies and coastal winds of that distant city shaped a boy who was both restless and unusually imaginative. His father, Kim Ledger, was a mining engineer and car racer, while his mother, Sally, was a French teacher. The family background was middle class, but the household carried its own fractures. His parents separated when Heath was young, and that rupture left a mark that friends would later describe as a lifelong search for belonging. As a child, Heath was not the archetypal extrovert destined for the stage. He was sensitive, observant, and often absorbed in his own world. Yet from the earliest age, performance became a form of release. At 10, he landed the role of Peter Pan in a school production. It was not simply play acting, it was a revelation. The stage gave him freedom from the anxieties of home life, and it allowed him to embody characters larger than himself. Acting was not entertainment, it was survival. Ledger was also drawn to chess, a passion he maintained throughout his life. At 15, he became the junior chess champion of Western Australia. Chess reflected the same qualities that would later define his approach to acting, patience, risk, and the ability to anticipate moves several steps ahead. Friends said he played like he lived, always searching for the most daring, unconventional path. School was never a sanctuary for him. At Guildford Grammar, Heath felt both out of place and ahead of the curve. His energy did not fit the classrooms, and by 17, he made the decision that would change everything. He left school to pursue acting. It was a bold gamble, one that reflected both youthful impatience and a deeper hunger. Perth was too small for his imagination. The wider world was calling. He began with Australian television, landing parts in series like Sweat and Home and Away. These were small roles, often dismissed as routine by critics. But for Ledger, they were stepping stones. Each set was a training ground. He studied directors, watched how crews moved, and treated even the simplest scenes as experiments. It was here that he honed the discipline to disappear into a role, even when the role itself was not memorable. What defined his early years was not privilege or accident, but persistence. He was not the child of Hollywood royalty. He was a boy from Perth, navigating divorce, isolation, and the quiet conviction that he was meant for something more. The combination of vulnerability and daring, forged in those early years, would later make his performances so unsettlingly real. Every expression on screen carried echoes of the boy who once found refuge in pretending to be someone else. By the time he boarded a plane for the United States in his late teens, Heath was not chasing fame blindly. He was chasing freedom, the freedom to create, to test limits, and to escape the shadows of a childhood that had both wounded and prepared him. The boy from Perth was ready to reinvent himself on the world stage. When Heath Ledger arrived in Los Angeles in the late 1992, Hollywood was teeming with young hopefuls. Yet from the start, there was something disarming about him. He was tall, magnetic, and carried an effortless charm. But what truly set him apart was his refusal to play the part of another heartthrob on command. He wanted roles with substance. He wanted to surprise. His American debut came with 10 Things I Hate About You in 1999, a modernized Shakespearean teen comedy. Ledger's role as Patrick Verona introduced him to an entire generation of young moviegoers. He was mischievous, witty, and unforgettable, especially in the now-famous serenade scene. Practically overnight, he became the new idol of American high school fantasies. Studio executives saw the making of a new leading man. Ledger saw a trap. He deliberately avoided the string of predictable teen comedies that could have made him rich but typecast. Instead, he leapt into The Patriot alongside Mel Gibson, proving he could deliver gravity and emotion. Then came A Knight's Tale in 2001, where he led the film with a combination of rugged masculinity and boyish vulnerability. Audiences adored him, critics began to notice, and the industry started to whisper, this young Australian might be the future. But fame, for Heath, was never uncomplicated. While Hollywood loved his looks, he was increasingly restless with the superficial adoration. He sought directors who would challenge him, scripts that would demand everything. That pursuit culminated in Brokeback Mountain, 2005. As Innes Del Mar, the quiet Wyoming cowboy in love with another man, Ledger delivered a performance so restrained and yet so heartbreaking that it redefined his career. The film was groundbreaking, but it was Heath's haunted silence, the way he clenched his jaw, the way his eyes carried decades of suppressed longing that earned him an Academy Award nomination and the respect of even his harshest skeptics. The role changed the conversation around him. He was no longer just a handsome import from Australia. He was an actor of rare depth, willing to risk reputation for authenticity. Hollywood was not always kind in return. Some tabloid voices mocked the film, but Ledger's commitment silenced them. For him, it was never about controversy. It was about truth. Still, success carried shadows. The higher Heath climbed, the more isolated he felt. In interviews, he often described the dissonance between the frenzy outside the cameras, the red carpets, the applause, and the quieter world inside, where he wrestled with insomnia and creative restlessness. Even as offers poured in, he began to fear that Hollywood's expectations and his own ambitions were on a collision course. By the mid-2002, Ledger had reached the pinnacle of stardom, but his path forward was already twisting. The roles became riskier, the transformations more consuming, and the sense of control increasingly fragile. He had become the star he once dreamed of being, but beneath the glow of success, something darker had begun to stir. The stage was set for the turn that would define and ultimately end his story. Behind the applause, Heath Ledger's life was never the easy fairy tale that magazines liked to paint. Fame magnified his brilliance, but it also deepened his struggles. He was a man of extremes, an actor who would disappear entirely into a role, and a person who found it difficult to resurface when the cameras stopped rolling. That intensity, which made him mesmerizing on screen, left scars when the lights went out. Insomnia became his constant companion. Friends recalled nights where Heath simply could not sleep, his mind racing with unfinished ideas, characters that still lived inside him, and an anxiety he could never quite quiet. He often spoke of lying awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, trapped between exhaustion and restlessness. Prescription medications became a crutch, sleeping pills to shut down his brain, stimulants to keep him going when work demanded. They were not indulgences, but desperate attempts at balance. Yet, in the end, they became a dangerous cycle. His relationship with actress Michelle Williams, forged during the filming of Brokeback Mountain, seemed for a time to anchor him. The birth of their daughter, Matilda, in 2005, was one of the few experiences that gave Heath a sense of clarity and joy. He adored being a father, often describing it as the most important role of his life. But the pressures of Hollywood, his restless creative drive, and his worsening insomnia placed strain on the relationship. By 2007, the partnership had unraveled, and Heath found himself more isolated than ever. The end of his family life was a blow he struggled to recover from. As his personal life fractured, his professional life grew darker. In 2007, he accepted the role that would cement his legacy and consume him entirely, the Joker in Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. Ledger approached the character with obsessive dedication. He locked himself in a London hotel room for weeks, keeping a diary filled with disturbing images and notes, working to unearth the psychology of chaos. He experimented with the Joker's laugh until it scraped the edges of madness. Nolan later said that Ledger created a performance so terrifying and magnetic that it was impossible to look away. But the process took a toll. Ledger admitted in interviews that playing the Joker had unsettled him. His insomnia worsened, and he found himself relying more heavily on medications to sleep. Crew members described how, even when the cameras stopped, there were moments when it seemed the Joker had not left him. His friends and colleagues worried, but Heath brushed aside the concern, insisting that he was fine. Yet the darkness was creeping closer. The tragedy of Heath Ledger's story is not only in the circumstances of his death, but in the way his greatest role intersected with his deepest vulnerabilities. The brilliance that audiences would later celebrate came at the cost of his peace. His fall was not a sudden collapse, but a gradual erosion. Sleepless nights, broken relationships, and the weight of inhabiting a villain so consuming that even Heath himself could not fully escape. By the final months of 2007, Heath was at once at the peak of his artistic powers and standing on the edge of a precipice. Hollywood saw only the promise of another unforgettable performance. Few recognized how close he was to breaking. By early 2008, Heath Ledger was both everywhere and nowhere. His name filled headlines, his face appeared on posters for The Dark Knight, yet privately he was increasingly fragile. He was 28 years old, young enough to still be called a rising star, yet already carrying the exhaustion of someone twice his age. What no one outside his closest circle understood was how thin the line had become between endurance and collapse. On the 22nd of January, 2008, the world received the news that froze Hollywood. Heath Ledger had been found unconscious in his Soho apartment in New York. A masseuse arrived for an appointment, knocked, and when he did not answer, she entered with the help of the housekeeper. They discovered him lying in bed, unresponsive. Attempts to revive him failed. Within hours, the story was everywhere on every news channel, across every front page. The vibrant young man who had enchanted audiences was gone. The official cause, released weeks later, was an accidental overdose of prescription medications, painkillers, sleeping pills, and anti-anxiety drugs mixed in lethal combination. To those who knew him, it was not the story of a wild addict. It was the story of a man who had fought insomnia, anxiety, and isolation with whatever tools were at hand and lost. The tragedy lay in its mundanity. The bottles by the bedside, the desperate hope for rest that never came. The shock reverberated across the film industry. At just 28, Ledger had left behind a daughter who would never truly know her father, colleagues who spoke of his unmatched dedication, and millions of fans who struggled to reconcile the vibrancy of his performances with the fragility of his final days. His co-stars mourned him publicly. Michelle Williams, the mother of his daughter, described him as a man whose spirit would remain in Matilda's smile. Christopher Nolan, the director of The Dark Knight, called him a fearless actor whose work transcended the screen. Ledger's funeral in his hometown of Perth was both intimate and monumental. Hundreds of mourners gathered, from family and childhood friends to fellow actors who flew across oceans to say goodbye. After the service, his family carried his coffin into the waves of Cottesloe Beach, releasing him to the sea he had grown up beside. The image of his loved ones walking barefoot into the water with his casket became a haunting symbol. The boy from Perth had come home. In the months that followed, grief turned into tribute. The Dark Knight premiered that summer, and Ledger's Joker instantly became one of cinema's most iconic portrayals. Audiences gasped, critics marveled, and the film soared to record-breaking heights. But for every standing ovation, there was an unspoken sadness. Heath was not there to see it. The Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor was awarded posthumously in 2009. His family accepted on his behalf, dedicating it to his daughter. It was the recognition of a genius delivered too late. The final years of Heath Ledger's life were not marked by scandal or collapse in the public sense. They were marked by the quiet battles of a man who gave everything to his art and found little left for himself. He left behind unfinished projects, notebooks filled with sketches and ideas, and friends who spoke of the vibrant conversations that now ended mid-sentence. His story closed suddenly, like a reel that snapped before the final scene. Yet even in his absence, Heath Ledger's presence only seemed to grow. His death was not an erasure, but a haunting reminder of how brilliance can burn too brightly, too fast. Heath Ledger's story did not end on that January day in 2008. If anything, his absence deepened his presence. What lingered was not just the tragedy of his death, but the undeniable force of his work. For many, Ledger became the embodiment of what it meant to live and die for one's art. A cautionary tale, yes, but also a beacon of authenticity in an industry that too often rewards the artificial. The role of the Joker in The Dark Knight remains his towering legacy. Ledger reshaped what a comic book villain could be. His Joker was not cartoonish, but terrifyingly human, a creature of chaos who spoke with unsettling conviction. Generations of actors would cite his performance as inspiration. Critics hailed it as one of the greatest in film history. The Academy Award, awarded posthumously, sealed his place among the immortals of cinema. Yet beyond the accolades, it was the raw intensity, the way audiences felt unsettled, even haunted, that made it unforgettable. Ledger did not just play the Joker. He revealed something about the darkness in all of us. But his legacy extends far beyond one role. Heath was restless, always exploring. He directed music videos, sketched ideas for films, and collaborated with artists across disciplines. He dreamed of moving behind the camera permanently. Friends remember him carrying notebooks filled with concepts, shots, and scripts, plans cut short, but not erased. In this way, his legacy is also a collection of unfinished blueprints, a reminder that creativity is a journey, not a destination. For his daughter Matilda, his true legacy is more personal. Though she was only 2 when he passed, those who knew him say that Heath's joy in fatherhood was profound. In interviews, Michelle Williams has spoken of the way she sees his spark in their child, the smile, the playfulness, the curiosity. In Matilda's life, Heath Ledger's spirit endures not as an icon, but as a father, remembered in gestures and traits too subtle for the public eye. Ledger's legacy also reshaped Hollywood's conversation about mental health. His insomnia, his struggles with anxiety, and the accidental nature of his overdose highlighted the silent battles many artists face. In an industry that often glorifies excess, his death became a sobering reminder of the human cost behind the performances that audiences consume. Discussions about actor well-being, the dangers of prescription medications, and the need for balance found new urgency after Ledger's passing. Culturally, Heath Ledger has become part of a lineage of talents gone too soon. James Dean, Marilyn Monroe, River Phoenix, Kurt Cobain. Yet among them, his story carries a unique resonance. He was not destroyed by scandal or self-destruction in the public sense. He was undone by the very intensity that made him extraordinary. His story warns of the dangers of pushing beyond human limits, but it also celebrates the beauty of daring to do so. Today, more than a decade later, Heath Ledger remains not only a star but a symbol. His films continue to play, his Joker still chills new audiences, and his story continues to move those who seek meaning in art and in life. He left us with a lesson disguised as tragedy, that genius and fragility often walk hand in hand, and that behind every performance is a human being searching for peace. The true meaning of Heath Ledger's legacy is not simply that he was brilliant or that he was lost too soon. It is that he showed us the heights art can reach when pursued without compromise, and the cost such pursuit can demand. In remembering him, we are reminded to value not only the legend on screen, but the person behind it, the boy from Perth who dreamed too fiercely, lived too intensely, and left us far too early. Heath Ledger's life reminds us that behind every dazzling smile and unforgettable performance lies a human being carrying battles we may never see. His rise was meteoric, his fall devastating, and his legacy eternal. From the boy in Perth who discovered freedom on stage, to the actor who gave cinema one of its most haunting villains, Heath's journey was both triumph and tragedy, a story of brilliance paid with the highest cost. When we watch him now, we do not only see a legend, we see the vulnerability of a man who gave everything to his craft, even when it consumed him. His story is not just about loss. It is about courage, artistry, and the delicate line between creation and self-destruction. And perhaps, most of all, it is about remembering that fame never erases fragility, and genius never guarantees peace. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below. Which moment of Heath Ledger's journey stayed with you the most, the rise, the fall, or the legacy? And which other star's untold story would you like us to uncover next? Because behind every icon, behind every legend we admire, there is always a human story waiting to be told.